In October of 1962, the world watched as the United States and the Soviet Union nearly went to nuclear war over the Soviet Union's attempts to place nuclear weapons in Cuba. The 13-day crisis between the 16th and 28th of October would be known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet decision to develop missile sites in Cuba was much of a product of its times. Initially, it stems from the US boxing in the USSR by Jupiter missiles capable of striking the USSR from Turkey and Italy. Russia would address many of these issues by arming Cuba. Raymond Garthov claims that the geographic placements of the missiles in Cuba compromises the advances that America had made in her missiles range capabilities, strengthened the ties of the Soviet camp, and showed strength to China, who was attempting to take control of the direction of socialism. At the time, JFK also seemed weak as a result of the Bay of Pigs incident and his age. He was expected to be easily bullied by the more experienced Khrushchev. On the 16th, day one, photographs were taken of the U-2 spy plane were revealed to JFK. The photos showed that what looked like the development of medium-range missile sites in Cuba. By the 18th of October, discussions in the US had moved to the concentrating on geopolitical aspects of the placement of ballistic missiles. The conclusion was that the USA could not accept the presence of missiles in Cuba, and they must be removed. On the 19th, the meeting of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs and military advisors concluded that airstrikes on the missile sites and base bases to be followed up by an invasion was the best solution. JFK argued that it would be only amount to this if a blockade failed. On the 22nd, JFK made public the crisis at hand. The following day, the US authorities issued a proclamation establishing the blockade around Cuba, which was in effect by 10 a.m. of the 24th. That morning of the 24th would be the turning point of the crisis. After a day of more speculations, a letter arrived from Khrushchev that suggested that the Soviets were intending to challenge the blockade because they deemed it illegal. From this point on, there would be constant contact between the US and Russia. By the 26th, 10 days into the crisis, plans to assault Cuba re-emerged. Later that day, a letter arrived from Khrushchev that hinted at the idea of a trade-off, removal of Cuban missiles for a pledge from the US not to invade Cuba. What is now known is that the letter was written hastily as Khrushchev had received intelligence of the US military build-up and an imminent attack on Cuba. The next day would be the most trying of the crisis. A letter was again received from Khrushchev that now also demanded the removal of the Jupiter missiles in Turkey and Italy. This caused a great stir as it lacked the language and rhetoric of Khrushchev in the first letter. The US believed it may be because of a coup of hardliners or that Khrushchev had become a puppet. The reality was, though, that the second letter was intended as a follow-up letter of the first, and it was written in less urgency. Also, although the course of the day, U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba by Cuban forces, it sparked stronger calls for a US attack. After the disregarding that morning's letter, a message was sent to Khrushchev while a meeting was held with the Russian ambassador. Khrushchev would read the agreement that the USA found acceptable could be met, while the ambassador was told of planned attacks on Cuba if the Russians did not agree to remove the missiles immediately. On the 28th of October, Khrushchev agreed to JFK's terms, ending the crisis. It was agreed that the Soviet Union would remove the missiles from Cuba under the condition that the US would publicly promise not to attack Cuba. The US also agreed to remove her now obsolete Jupiter missiles from Europe if the Soviets agreed to keep it a secret. In retrospect, aspects that the movie does not discuss include Timothy McEwen's claims that the USA first discovered the possibility of operational missiles in Cuba 18 months before the crisis escalated, so then why in October had there been no update to the routine? It remained as the single integrated operational plan, a nuclear preemptive strike on all major installations of all communist countries should war present itself. Garthov also deduces that there must not have been strong communication between the Russians and the Cubans, as Castro, at being annoyed at the detection of missiles during the blockade, claimed that he would have been able to provide cover through a construction activity. Though much of the evidence also available to historians comes from the secretly taped ExComm meetings, they have proven to be problematic as recordings are subject to Kennedy's discretion. Sheldon raises such an incident where Robert Kennedy is heard saying, on the first day of the crisis, if you bomb the missile sites and the airports, you are going to kill a lot of people. This implies that he was a pacifist from the start. The reality, though, was that he was actually implying that bombing was not enough and that he was in favor for a full invasion of the island as well.